So yes, I know I'm pushing back Nintendo Power retrospectives for one more month, but in this case, there's a reason. When I started up, really started breaking it all down, the show was not just pretty close to E3, it was during E3. And I've pretty much marked E3 as being my anniversary for the show. That's why I did my big memorial thing when E3 was officially canceled, and likely meaning was dead. So, still, now with E3 being effectively dead, I figured it would be appropriate to shift gears to have my anniversary be related to Summer Games Fest. And consequently give what I thought were some of my highlights of the games that were showcased or introduced at this event, whether or not they were new. But we got to see more of them under the circumstances. With that in mind, here are 6 titles from Summer Games Fest that caught my eye and 6 honorable mentions. Why 6 and 6? Well, first it totals up to 12, this is my channel's 12th anniversary. So a nice good 50-50 split for each should work, and gives plenty of opportunity to talk about some games that weren't like the big ones they can say a big long thing about, or at least a few paragraphs about, but are still interesting and worth calling attention to nonetheless, as far as games that I've caught my interest and I have Steam wishlisted. When I did my first tabletop RPGs for video games fans recommendation video, I recommended that fans of Bethesda's other original universe their first original universe for computer role-playing games, The Elder Scrolls, would enjoy the RuneQuest role-playing game due to how the Elder Scrolls skill system meshes well with how the RuneQuest skill mechanics, and for that matter, BRP fantasy mechanics, or basic fantasy mechanics, works, and how some of the setting elements of the world of Tamriel, including elements of its mythology, can mesh with the world of Glorantha, which makes sense considering that Bethesda had brought longtime patron of the RuneQuest rules Ken Ralston on board to develop the lore of the Elder Scrolls further. So, when Starfield got announced, I was curious as to, what tabletop role-playing game of the science fiction variety Bethesda would take cues from here. Would they be going with Traveler? Would they be going with good old Alternity or Star Frontiers? What have you. And indeed, they did take cues from another game, and in that case, Traveler. Honestly, Starfield feels like the best Traveler video game that we've had in decades, feeling even stronger on that concept than, the Traveler licensed video games that we had decades ago for MS-DOS. Is it the one match for that world? No. The world of Starfield, as we've seen it in the trailers, is very human-centric, with no alien races like the Vargir or the Aslan that the world of Traveler has. However, the game does do a good job of getting across that sense of being just some person trying to get by in a big universe that, by comparison, Mass Effect doesn't necessarily, due to, in Mass Effect, you being part of being a Spectre working for the Citadel and that sort of thing. Now, I'm not diminishing the Mass Effect games in that regard, not in the slightest. I played through 3 and Andromeda here on this channel for Let's Plays, but Starfield fits with the Traveler campaign mindset that, while yes, you have a level system, which is something that Traveler lacks, that's included here, probably more something that players expect more than a deliberate mechanical choice. Your skill development is based around engaging in practical skills in particular ways to develop them, as opposed to the Elder Scrolls mechanism of use a skill, just keep using it, and eventually it will go up. This feels like a reasonable kind of middle ground from a gameplay standpoint for replicating or riffing, probably a better statement, on how skill progression is used in Traveler, where you work on training up your skill while doing an intersystem jump. Now, that said, if the game gives you opportunities to, say, on intersystem jumps to work on developing your skills or that sort of thing, particularly skills that you may not necessarily have an opportunity to use so often, but you do want to develop and don't want to find opportunities to grind them, then that would clinch it for me as them trying to kind of map to Traveler in that regard as well. Number 2, Justant. Justant, which admittedly I'm not sure how it's pronounced because we didn't have anyone on stage to present it, is a game that does a really, not just really, but tremendous sense of striking a solid hybrid of vibe and mechanics, creating a sense of place around climbing up some mountain. We didn't get the name from the trailer. And with the exploration of various structures there, all that have been constructed into and on. There's an important distinction here between in caves and that sort of thing, and then also basically kind of bolted on to the side of the mountain. On top of that, having seen some gameplay of this on a couple streams, the controls look particularly interesting. While this was showcased on the Microsoft Game Show, I really hope this gets a PS5 release, because the way the game mechanically works is has you using the triggers to handle the grip of your left and right hands, and then using analog stick to handle hand placement. And I think this is a game that could really take advantage of the triggers on the PS5's controller in a very interesting way. And on top of this, this could really give a better sense of climbing as a game mechanic and puzzle in a way that we haven't necessarily gotten in the past, that we get with the quick stick to handholds kind of thing that you have with the Uncharted series or the Star Wars Jedi games or that sort of thing. So I'm really excited for Justin, and really looking forward to getting a chance to play with at length beyond the demo. Number 3, Alan Wake 2. I mentioned this a little in my blog post for a recap of the past press conferences, but Alan Wake 1 is the game that made me think seriously about streaming games, and it's the reason why I stream games now and do Let's Plays. As I had moments when I was playing that game that were great moments and don't necessarily make for a good no crap there I was in the game discussion. It works more as video in context shared via streaming or other things. So, and I didn't have a chance to do that at the time because I wasn't thinking about streaming. So consequently, Alan Wake 2 is a game that I am looking forward to streaming and possibly making the first horror game that I do stream on my channel. So I'm definitely hyped for that. Number 4, Jumplight Odyssey. Jumplight Odyssey looks like a game that has the crew management progression of something like FTL in the sense of moving your crew around to handle power management, repairing systems, repelling boarders, and that sort of thing, much as you did with FTL, but with larger ships, with polygonal graphics, and that sort of thing. And all of this also on top of that with the trappings of anime series created by Leiji Matsumoto, especially Space Battleship Yamato, complete with the mechanical designs looking like they're right out of Matsumoto's work, with these missiles with this kind of large round head with these little small circles around the end. It's a very Matsumoto design in that regard. I, again, would like to have some hands-on time before I make a final judgment, but this game very much looks like it's a lot of fun. Number 5, Metaphor Fantazzio. Atlas brought a trio of really strong titles to Microsoft's Game Showcase, from Persona 5 Tactics, which appears to be adapting the Devil Survivor framework, modernizing it, and releasing it with the Persona 5 cast, or the Persona 3 Reloaded, which is using the modernizations and quality of life developments from later Persona games and applying those to Persona 3 in that game's gameplay, although admittedly without the inclusions of Fez and of the female protagonist from Portable. However, what I think overshadowed those for me was Metaphor Fantazzio, which appeared to be the Persona crew doing a game that is somewhat like Persona, but not in the sense of something that, like what the Caligula effect was, where it's telling a story set in modern Japan around a high school with characters dealing with real life social issues that teenagers face. This is a straight fantasy series, or fantasy game, with some of the framework elements like social links and social interactions between party members, and the stylistic visual flourishes that we got from the Persona games, particularly as they went on and on over time, as they developed further from 4 and then to 5, but in a fantasy framework. So this could be particularly fun. I'm looking forward to playing this a lot. However, before we get to my 6th title, time for some honorable mentions. Honorable mentions. Station to Station looks neat, using voxels for a sort of VR model railroad, not VR, but virtual model railroad game. Not just doing the railroad tycoon Sid Meier's Railroads thing where you're setting up a rail network, but having what appears to be like some hard limits on the scope of your map with that sort of drop off does give that sense of that you're dealing with a big giant model railroad set in a basement or something like that. It gives that real strong sense of that, which I think gives it a nice spin that other games in the genre don't necessarily have, that they put their focus more on the simulation of the economic side of things without necessarily thinking as much on the other elements, or like making the simulation play into the simulation side, that like letting that aspect of it kind of do its own thing. 30XX looks like the Mega Man X maker I didn't know needed to exist until now. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to do much with making levels in it, the same way I don't do much with making levels necessarily in Mario Maker, but I do anticipate this leading to some really spectacular speedruns at future Games Done Quick events. And that's assuming that, I don't know, somebody like Dan Reichert doesn't get a hold of it and do some elaborate feud between him and another person in the game press, or an influencer or something like that, with more and more elaborately, sadistically designed levels. I am already sold on Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, so I don't need to see more, but I like what I saw, and I'm looking forward to getting it and playing it. I played Part 1 and enjoyed it. I want to play Part 2, and I'm probably going to enjoy that as well. Reasonable confidence in that regard. Star Wars Outlaws also has my interest in terms of the larger game concept. I've already been into what EA has done with the Star Wars Jedi games, and I'm down for getting a possibly Jedi-free story in Ubisoft's title here. We'll see how the final product pans out, but what I see here looks promising. Avowed has my interest as a fan of the Pillars of Eternity series. I've beaten Pillars of Eternity 1 and am most of the way through Pillars of Eternity 2 and playing through the DLC. As someone who liked Fallout New Vegas, I'm interested to see what Obsidian does with a Elder Scrolls style game in the Pillars of Eternity universe. But it's a particular game where they spend enough time doing development on it that there's a lot of more sense of what they can do and where they can go with this, as opposed to something like The Outer Worlds, which they're more building from whole cloth, so to speak. In that, Earthless looks interesting. It's definitely have the sense of the developer's pedigree from the Homeworld series here stylistically, and on top of that, they're doing this rather than a real-time strategy game as a tactical deck builder. And as somebody who recently started playing Marvel's Midnight Suns as well, and I'm digging the tactical deck builder gameplay there, I'm really looking forward to seeing how things pan out here. Number 6, Last Train Home. Rare is the moment in the video game press conference where I find myself learning something about history that I hadn't heard of before. Not because I'm like super ultra well versed in all aspects of history, but more in the sense of normally when it comes to moments of history that get adapted into video games, the stuff that is less well known doesn't necessarily get glommed onto to the same respect. So I was surprised to see the trailer for Last Train Home, see the mention that it was based on a true story, and then through further research discovering basically the story of a 20th century Anabasis. I found reading about this to be a tremendously captivating story, and I am definitely looking forward to seeing how this concept of the Czechoslovakian Legion trying to make their way to the sea so they can be evacuated from Russia, now in the midst of the Russian Civil War between the Red and White Russians, to get evacuated and hopefully make it back to Czechoslovakia. That was then the new Czechoslovakian state. So I'm really looking forward to see how this all pans out. So what games caught your interest from Summer Games Fest? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks, also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.